This episode of Planted is brought to you by Pax Labs.
The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sarah Pine. I'm Sarah Pine, your host, and today we're in a very special place. We are at the Sunset Social Club in West Hollywood. We're in town for the Cannabis Culture and Change Conference, and I have two very special guests. One is a new friend. So we have Rich Magaña, founder of Queer in Cannabis, a national platform and community-centered LGBTQIA for professionals and entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry. And as cannabis evolves from legacy to mainstream, the question isn't just who profits, it's who feels seen, supported, and empowered. Also, we have a dear friend who's been on the show before. We're welcoming back Executive Director of Emerald Village WeHo, Scott Schmidt. Welcome, guys. It is such a fun thing to have you both on and continue these conversations, because one of the things, and we were just talking about this before we were recording, one of the things that we don't talk about enough, and we should, is the inherent queerness of cannabis and the rich history and how we can't forget what brought us all here. So both of you, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And you're coming from Boston, right?
Yeah, I missed the blizzard. So yes, I was originally from California, from Southern California, but I've been in Boston for like the last 6 years, and just flew in on Monday and just thriving with this 90-degree weather.
This has got to be downright balmy for you.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't tell you the last time I wore shorts and a shirt. So yeah, I am thriving. It's great to be back home.
So I'm going to ask you the question I ask all my guests in their first time on the show. What was your first cannabis experience?
A nightmare. My first, I was the youngest of about 15 cousins. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of those, moments in the backyard of my grandma's house. And my cousins were like, hey, do you want to smoke? And of course, I'm like, I want to be a grown up. And took a couple hits and completely lost it. Ton of anxiety. It wasn't the best experience, but it definitely was an experience that I'll never forget. And it certainly didn't stop me from smoking, but it definitely gave me, an opportunity to kind of pause and just be a little bit more responsible of my consumption. But
yeah. Well, I think, for those of us, for people listening out there, and for those of us in the room, it's like we've all had at least one of those moments where you stop and you're pause and you're like, okay, this is a message to step back for a second, listen to my body, and figure out what works well for me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Queer in Cannabis, how did that come about?
So Queer in Cannabis was, something that has always been in the back of my mind. So, growing up in Southern California, I, had the opportunity to be around, pop culture and music and film and television, and, being in a place that was very diverse, right? And so one of my first experiences, with cannabis and kind of how I really kind of, I would say I became an advocate like at 12. That was around the time that my uncle Danny had passed away from HIV/AIDS. Oh. So it was my way of really kind of connecting to the plant and understanding the power that it had. So this was towards the, I would say, early 90s, my uncle, flocked to the San Francisco area, like most gay men did, around that time. And, he had contracted HIV/AIDS. And towards, the last, stages of his life, he, my aunts and my uncles, my mom, went up north to, spend some time with him during his time of need. Mm-hmm. And when they got back, there was just so many stories that really impacted me. So many stories of just reconnecting and love and really meeting him at a time where he needed them the most. And having heard those stories about Uncle Danny and cannabis and connecting the dots of what this was. And, cannabis from a very early age, 12 years old, cannabis was something that really connected my uncle with my family on his terms, and it also gave him an opportunity to be free in a time that was so dark. And so, I really had a lot of gratitude towards marijuana at that time, and really, was very felt really deeply on how compassionate cannabis was towards him, towards the end of his life.
Yeah. And when you look at the stigma around it, I feel like in many ways the queer community has been more open-minded about options for care, for the way we look at the world, things like that, for the simple fact that the stigma with the LGBTQ community that we've seen from society at large, and knowing that that's terrifically wrong and short-sighted. And so not everything that is stigmatized is wrong, and not everything that is embraced as correct is necessarily right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But that's really kind of how I really kind of found myself within cannabis. And, I think growing up, I saw what the cannabis industry did to my community, the opportunities that it provided, not only for my LGBT community, but also for the Latin community. A lot of my uncles, were pot dealers, and they did what they could to make money. And so, there really was, from an early age, there was really no stigma. There was just a lot of compassion towards that. And, I really, had in the back of my mind, knew that this space was a space that I wanted to end up in.
Yeah.
But I went a different direction. I ended up going into fashion and beauty, and really kind of like learning my craft when it came to like marketing and events and consumer goods and specialty niche retail, and not knowing that this was always going to kind of tee me up for, my third career at this time, which I've been in cannabis for about 5 years, and was one of those, folks who got displaced during COVID. And, being in beauty, we're always kind of, we're touching faces, probably the worst industry to be in the middle of a global pandemic. And so I found a lot of my coworkers and people that I've worked with the last decade displaced. And so, you do what you do, and you reinvent yourself, and you find plan B. And at that time, the only company that would take my interview was cannabis at the time. And so it was a beautiful thing. And 10 years ago, if anyone asked me, would you be working in cannabis, I would probably say I wish, but it never was on my horizon. I was going to be in beauty. I was going to be an educator, and that was really it. And when I found myself in cannabis, it brought back the stories of my Uncle Danny. It brought back a lot of the advocacy, right? And I noticed that, whenever I go into dispensaries, I started to notice that when I was there was a lot of LGBTQ folks in the industry.
Yeah. And,
because of where I grew up and at my age, being a little bit older than most folks at the dispensary, I was able to tell them about like Dennis Perrone. And Mary Rathbun and all these trailblazers, and I would see their faces light up, and it was like one of those things where I was like, this needs to be told. These stories need to be told, because our community has always been at the forefront, of cannabis legalization. So it was so great to connect the dots and be able to see people feel even closer to cannabis. And that was kind of the beginning stages of queer and cannabis, and really kind of being that entity that provided, advocacy, that provided safe spaces, that provided inclusivity and visibility within the cannabis space, right? In and outside of the dispensary. And so for the last several years, we've really just been cultivating this community that has always relied on cannabis, right? Like I always, when I think about what ails my community, it's anxiety, it's depression, trauma. What does cannabis help with? It helps with all of those things. So it felt like this organic moment where my community, even though they didn't understand the history behind it, they felt that connection.
Right. Well, and I think when you have those conversations, like I was mentioning before we started recording, I got my start in the Castro and working with a lot of young folks in the dispensary, a part of the LGBTQ community, and really getting into the education and the history. Not only, you have your work, but then you have your why. And that creates a lot of passion and just kind of figuring out, you may not be behind the bar forever. So where do you want to go? Where do your passions lie in this?
Yeah. And so like now with Queer in Cannabis, we go to dispensaries and we educate bud tenders and dispensaries on the history of legalization because it matters. And so it's been such a great opportunity to be able to really connect the dots of everything that I've done in my life and to be able to do something that is needed, especially right now, when we're looking at, rollbacks of healthcare, and we're looking at things that we fought for and we won, decades ago, and we're starting to see things creep up again. So it's great to be able to be in this space and to be able to educate and really connect the dots for other folks to remind ourselves that, like you said earlier, cannabis is inherently queer. And it's important for us to have a seat at the table. It's important for us to be able to tell our stories because let's be honest, HIV/AIDS took out generations.
Yes.
So, and where are those storytelling? And also it was a time where not a lot of people wanted to document what was going on. So there's this gap of history, this gap of acknowledging these badass trailblazers that I do think it's important for us to know. And it reminds us that we have been here before.
Yes, we have. And, even though there have been people who have wanted to tell the stories like, Cleve Jones with the AIDS quilt and things like that, for people who are coming here, it's like where I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is, for the most part, a very white, cisgendered area with, it's become more diverse, but there's definitely closed-mindedness. And it's not necessarily because of people, being born that way. It's who and the humanizing of another person and seeing that, it doesn't matter what your pronouns are or who you love. It's what's in your heart. And I think when we have greater conversations about that, we have a better world.
Yeah.
You know it the moment it hits. That weight, that presence, that shift. Power you can feel. Introducing PAX 4, the next generation in dry herb vaporizers and the most powerful device PAX has ever created. Engineered for heavy clouds and high potency, 4 delivers dense vapor, fast onset, and real intensity, all without combustion. No burn, just pure controlled power from your flower. 4 precision heat modes that let you dial in your experience. Quick, high-impact hits or longer, fuller sessions, all in a device that's light in the hand, heavy on performance. And with fast USB-C charging and a redesigned oven for easier cleaning, 4 is built for real life, ready when you are, session after session. Because true power isn't about smoke, it's about how it feels. And for listeners of Planted, get 20% off PAX 4 with code PLANTED20 at PAX.com. PAX 4, power you can feel. Available starting March 3rd on PAX.com and at selected retailers.
Absolutely. And it is a reminder that we will forever have more in common than we will have differences. It's about figuring out where those common threads are, where are they at? And, that's one of the many things that I believe we all love about cannabis is that it really is kind of like that unifier. When we're smoking, we're stoners wanting to get high, at least for me. And that's really our thing. It's to just kind of be a little bit higher than a normal state of mind and drop those like barriers and be able to have conversation without feeling anxiety or, anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the themes I've been talking a lot about this year and in 2026 is that, sunshine is a disinfectant and its light is in each of us. And the most powerful thing that we can do is just simply to come out for cannabis. As you say, if you know someone, who's LGBT, you're more likely to support LGBT rights. If you know someone who's trans, you're more likely to support trans rights. If you know someone who uses cannabis, you're more likely to support cannabis legalization and cannabis rights. And, the things that the LGBT community learned, from leaders like Harvey Milk and those, who came before us, are still relevant and, maybe more important for the cannabis community, because the stigma continues, and it's not just the government stigma. It's, even the New York Times, is writing things that, are not accurate. I don't want to say fake news because I think it was an editorial.
It was an awful editorial,
yeah,
though.
right?
It wasn't well done.
But, and the truth is, this easiest thing we can do is, come out for cannabis, tell our stories, come out for cannabis and talk about why we use it. Come out for cannabis, talk about, how it helps us get through, with whether it's the anxiety or the insomnia or the inflammation or, dealing with side effects of drugs and, all of those things. Because I really believe that we're closer to legalization than people realize, just looking at the timeline and the long march of history. And, one of the wonderful things about being here in West Hollywood, California is, is where the long march began,
Yeah.
both, with LGBT rights and cannabis, and it was San Francisco and West Hollywood. And, we're telling that story here. We've pulled together a wonderful group of folks to come together and have conversations about, the medical values of cannabis, about design, storytelling, politics, and all of those things, to tie together really how we can, what we can learn from the intersection of LGBT and cannabis. Rich and I worked together to put on the first LGBT event at MJBizCon.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up, because part of community and communing together is actually getting together. And you've done some great events in the past year. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So we had the amazing opportunity to be at the MJBizCon, and we were hosted several panels. One of which was, how can legal cannabis be stronger allies to LGBTQ and Black and Brown organizations and companies? And so that was the first time that MJBizCon has had that type of dialogue, which I felt was so needed, especially for the MJBizCon crowd. So we did that, and we had Scott as one of our special guests talking about all the great things that's going on here in West Hollywood and with Emerald Village. And then we also were able to be a part of the first LGBTQ happy hour at MJBizCon. And that was phenomenal to be able to really lift up the community that has done so much already for the cannabis industry. And again, connect those dots. So when we had two drag queens perform, one of which I think Sabiana, from West Hollywood. And we had drag performers, we had a tarot reader, we had a lot of conversation, and it was such a great opportunity to be able to mix so many different types of people from the industry, and have them all just kind of all of us just rejoicing in this queer joy, so to speak.
Well, and there's something about an event like that allows you to just take a sigh, be yourself, just relax and enjoy the moment, because it's a safe space.
It's a safe space, and it's a space we all really feel comfortable in, whether you're part of the community from the LGBT perspective or the cannabis community. And it was great. I just had a conversation with Sam from MJBizCon, and they were, the folks at MJBizCon did a big brainstorm of, what was working, what wasn't working. And a lot of the staff said that one of the highlights of MJBizCon was the event that we did with Emerald Village, because we built that community. We actually even had the folks from the Gangier Guild. They had hosted a party right before ours, and they said they saw two drag queens walk in, and they were like, "We're not going anywhere."
Oh no!
And so they ended up staying for the entire event, and it was a success story in the sense that we were able to connect. And I've touched base with the folks at the Guild, and we're going to be doing something in Boston in a couple months. So it was such a great experience and a good exercise in how important it is to network and to be able to commit to each other and be able to continue doing our work together, because as we all know, it takes a village, right?
It does. And it's a call for greater inclusivity. It's it's not about just having products CPG branded to appeal to the queer community. It's about across the board being seen and included and looked at as part of the greater cannabis community itself.
Discover the power of Yorma's Choice CBD products. When we chose a sober life, we searched for the best CBD to manage our chronic pain. In Raywood, Kentucky, the home of Bickett and Boone, we found the perfect solution. Yorma's Choice is a range of topicals, tinctures, bath salts, and gummies. Choose Yorma's Choice for pain-free living. Shop now at furpeaceranch.com. FURPEACERANCH.com.
Well, and while we're on that, we have to thank Brian Applegarth and Lisa Snyder from Tokativity for working to help put on that event. It's really a team effort. And, in the 30,000 people at MJ BizCon, we all have we say we have gaydar, but you don't want to go up and make a mistake, right?
You never know.
Right?
You never know.
So it was great to be like, hey, come and we're going to have our own party. And, we were at the New Lounge, and the manager said it was the best attended event they had during all of MJ BizCon, which was great. One thing that LGBT people and cannabis people have in common is that, we're everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we're everyone. It crosses all kinds of divides.
And you know how to have a good time.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Yes. And we're creative, but, cannabis, LGBT, it doesn't matter, gender, age, race, sex, socioeconomic status, class, geography, nationality, we're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, is that, we are representative of every community, worldwide.
Well, that, and if you really look at whether you're looking at cannabis, fashion, what have you, some of the most creative things have come from the LGBTQ community. Mm-hmm. They're the tastemakers, like really, whether you're looking at music, movies, fashion,
even in policy, when we talk about San Francisco and West Hollywood, it's part of like that laboratory of federalism, where when West Hollywood was founded in 1984, we were the first city ever to have a gay majority city council or legislative body, and it wasn't sure whether it was going to succeed, right, at the time, and a lot of folks were hoping that West Hollywood would fail, and we proved them wrong. In so many ways. And, we call ourselves the creative city because of places like the Sunset Strip. We're at Sunset Social Club today on the Sunset Strip, which has been the home of live music and rock and roll. You've got the Whiskey a Go-Go, the Viper Room, and all these historic places, where Grateful Dead used to perform, etc. We've got the LGBT nightlife down on Santa Monica Boulevard. We have the Design District, where the interior design industry, meets and comes together. We've got Oprah Winfrey Studios and the original United Artists Studios.
You bring the flavor.
All right here in West Hollywood. And, we created the first municipal cannabis ordinance that was passed by a city council to regulate, and set that, we created the first cannabis lounges. And, in my opinion, they're some of the best in the world. And, we have a California flower, which makes it even better.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you.
And there's that.
Yeah,
yes.
there is that.
There's that.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I was just when I was in Europe this year, everything that I pretty much came across with flour was coming from our home state. And then what does that say? Or if it didn't, they made it look like it did. And what does that say?
Exactly.
So California flour, it can be like California wine. Some of it's from Napa and some of it's from Fresno.
We love you, Fresno.
And I'm fine with both.
I love it. Well, let's talk about what we're doing here this weekend, because this is the first time that you've done this conference. You want to tell us a little bit about that, Scott?
Yeah. So, last fall, the Vice Mayor Danny Hang of West Hollywood approached me and said, his faculty advisor at USC is a professor by the name of Sam Mastrano in the School of Social Work. And Sam is also the faculty liaison for the Cannabis at USC Club for students. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to do a discussion about medical cannabis and science. And around the same time, Rich approached me and said, "Hi, I have a film I'd like to screen." And I said, "Well, I'm about to get the city to give me city council chambers for a day. So why don't we build something out of it?" And, I knew that Rich's documentary, Join the Club, was about Dennis Prone and Brownie Mary in San Francisco. And as you know, if you're from California, we have a rivalry. It says Dodgers versus Giants, and 49ers versus the Rams, and the Raiders against the Chargers. And it's the same is true between the Castro and West Hollywood.
It's a little friendlier though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we love each other. In many ways, right?
Right.
And so I was like, well, if we're gonna tell the Dennis Prohn story with the documentary, let's tell the West Hollywood story during the day. And over the last in the last few years working for Emerald Village and going and telling our West Hollywood story, I've met a bunch of amazing people like yourself, Sarah, on the road. And I just opened up my Rolodex. I'm like, hey, I want to do this thing. Will you join us? And, eventually I even had, people like Beau Whitney, emailing me. It's like, I want to be part of it too. And, really pulled together a great group of folks to have a discussion about, how it all fits together, about how, talking about the deep roots of how legal cannabis came from the LGBT community and what the cannabis world can learn from the LGBT community. Because when you go to these cannabis events, like, C Days in Barcelona or Bilbao or ICBC, it's a lot of talk about agriculture and science and all of those things, and a lot of talk about politics and policy, and the LGBT visibility really isn't there. Yeah. And I think last year when we were at ICBC Berlin and we hosted the Consumption Lounge, because I wanted people to think Consumption Lounges and West Hollywood in the same sentence. And, we had a big step and repeat with a drag queen from Drag Race Canada dressed up as Liza Minnelli, because, we're in Berlin and that's where Cabaret was set.
Yeah.
Right. And, and as a gay man, that's the first thing I think about when I think about Berlin is Liza Minnelli.
Me too.
Yeah. And it was like the first time. And so it was really the first time that there was really big LGBT visibility at one of these events. And it was great to do it again at MJ BizCon. And
Emerald Village, West Hollywood, the heart of cannabis culture in Los Angeles. From the first legalized dispensaries to the nation's first cannabis cafe, WeHo leads the way. Visit legacy spots like AHHS, LAPCG, and MedMen. The fresh vibes at Calma, Urban Leaf, and Green Queen. Chill at lounges like The Artistry, OG Cannabis Cafe, Off the Charts, Pleasure Med, and The Woods. Emerald Village WeHo, the world's 5-star cannabis destination. Your elevated escape awaits.
I think that there's a natural fit between like the LGBT in cannabis and the women in cannabis, because there's a lot of bro culture that has gotten into the industry side of things, and they're all chasing the same market. The growth, I think, is in LGBT, and the growth is with women. And if you want to be successful in the next 5-10 years, figure out how to reach those communities.
That's it. I think you're right on the mark with that. I mean, that was something that I found really surprising, because I was in my little area of the Castro where we just joked that we were a bunch of nerdy weirdos who love weed. And then going out into the greater cannabis industry and really kind of seeing the very uber straight cisgendered male gaze that was pervading, but that they weren't doing so well. I mean, when we're looking at what's successful, it's actually connecting with your community and not necessarily talking about the highest percentage of THC or how high you can get, but what makes you feel good, what helps you commune, what's connecting to community.
Yeah, and like what Scott was saying is that there's such a synergy already with cannabis and the LGBT community. However, we don't see a lot of that partnership when it comes to national brands. We see a lot of oh great, let's definitely meet up, and then you do a follow up and then you're completely just ghosted. So I think that there's also a really good opportunity, during this time when we are talking about making sure that we're communicating to the LGBT community, right? But how to do it like in an authentic way.
That part, because what we saw this, and I hate to do the comparison with cannabis and alcohol, but I remember when we started seeing Bud Light a lot in bars and things like that, and all of the, especially in the Castro, And then what we saw in recent years when they started to get pressure from people who were a little bit closed-minded about who actually is the greater community of our nation. And then that's when you see that maybe that support wasn't as authentic as it should have been.
And we've seen that, at least with Queer and Cannabis, we've seen 2 years ago and what that partnership looked like, to then last year where we've seen at least 70 to 80% of our supporters from the previous year completely pull out, simply because, it's too much of a risk or it's a bad PR move. And so I think that there's really been that opportunity in real time for us to realize okay, well, we need to do something about this. We need to take control of our own narrative.
Yes.
And ultimately create the things that we want seen, and so over the last, over the last year, my partner, John, and I have talked about, what is that next move? And the next move for us is to launch our own brand.
I love that.
And do it in a way that is meaningful and it's authentic. And we make sure that the community that we've been cultivating, right, for the last several years is always at the forefront of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think that if we've learned anything over the last year is that, to wait for someone to save us, probably not. We just need to create our own narrative, make sure that no one is going to water down our stories or try to silence our stories.
Well, and I look at too, when we get around, the months of Pride, when people, for the rest of the year, they're silent and all of a sudden the rainbows are coming out and it's like, yo, buddy, Pride is every day.
It's every month. Pride is every month. And it's very evident, the companies that are, that understand that, even with, what we're doing, right now with this amazing event that we're doing with Emerald Village, we've reached out to, all the major players to see if they wanted to be a part of what I considered and what you consider to be, history in the making. We're putting these stories at the forefront. We're a documentary that is literally, a time capsule of the war on drugs, but with a queer lens. We're about to unpack some of this, and I think it's important to have those allies or those folks who are open and willing to be able to keep our stories sacred and keep them in a way that we could lift them up and make sure that we don't forget them.
Yes.
Yeah, Pride is every day, and one of the themes that came out of the panel at MJBizCon that we had was that, we need to re-queer the cannabis industry. It started here. As Ngayo Bialum was a bud tender at LAPCG, and LAPCG is still here, and Ngayo is back in town, and we love it. And it's not just during Pride; it is every day. Mm-hmm. But Pride does matter. This year, World Pride is in Amsterdam, and it made perfect sense for us to look at doing things there. And a month ago, I was there in the middle of an ice storm, and going to coffee shops along the canal where the parade is. And I was like, "Hey, would you be interested in hosting a drag brunch the morning of the Pride parade?" And one of the owners, was like, "Well, we never really thought about doing something for Pride." I'm like, why, how, just you're here, you're on the parade, you're going to have tens of thousands of people right in front of your place. And, they're like, well, we're not sure how our regulars would react to that. And I'm like, this is Amsterdam. Like, it just didn't make sense. Cause, for me, Amsterdam has always been that place where you can come as you are and be welcome. And as long as you don't, harm others, right, it's cool.
Yeah.
Right. And so the idea that having a gay presence during a gay event at a coffee shop just seemed like it would be a natural fit, but and that anyone would think that it might hurt their business in the long term really came as a shock, especially in 2026. I mean, this ain't 1996. I thought the world has changed, but we still have work to do, and that work is again, it's not just during Pride. So on the way to ICBC Berlin this year, where we're hosting the West Hollywood Lounge once again, we're gonna stop in Amsterdam, and these streamers, Stephanie Quattro and Bella Luca, are gonna pull together the LGBT bud tenders from around town, and we're gonna sesh.
Yes.
And
That's awesome.
and that's how it starts. It's just doing these things and reaching out and being present and supporting our allies and and telling our stories. And so, Rich talks about, re-queering cannabis, and, me, I want everyone to learn from the LGBT and take the lessons we learned, especially during the marriage battles that I fought and, before that, and apply those.
Mm-hmm.
How do we grow the coalition beyond our traditional support? How did we get marriage equality across the finish line? Because that's probably how we're going to get descheduling across the finish line.
Right.
Right.
It's like so many of these answers can be found in our past, right? In history.
Well, 5 years from now, what do you want to see Queer and Cannabis to have built? This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
I think the biggest thing with queer and cannabis, I always go back to it, is the history. What I would love is that everyone who smokes a joint, that they take a moment and realize like where this freedom came from, and the folks that fought for it. Mm-hmm. That's what I would love, for everyone to understand that and correlate the two, and to ask when they go to a dispensary what queer brands they have, and really condition the industry, right? When you look at conscious shopping, we do it with beauty, we do it with fashion. Mm-hmm. Why should we do it with cannabis? And so I really hope we get to a point where we just have consumers that are coming in wanting specific products that really embolden them, empower them.
Any thoughts at all, Scott, as far as...
well, in 5 years, I want cannabis to be descheduled. Whether
yes,
I'm
a descheduled girl,
I want to be
too.
descheduled. I want the world to know that, think of West Hollywood as the Beverly Hills of weed. Mm-hmm. You want the best flower and the best venues, the real luxury experience, aspirational. Come here. You don't need to fly to Amsterdam. It's a shorter flight. The weather is better. The weed is better. And I can say that because since we last talked, Sarah, I was a judge at the Amsterdam Coffee Shop Awards.
So
Yeah, so I know. Yeah, exactly. And the team from the Amsterdam Coffee Shop Awards are going to be doing the West Hollywood Awards here May 27th to 31st, which will be a wonderful chance to, showcase our venues and our products, not just to the local folks, but we even have a tour group coming from Germany that is coming to visit. Normally, this tour operator goes to Jamaica and Thailand and those traditional cannabis destinations, and they're coming to West Hollywood for the first time, and so just really excited to be able to share our story, and as legalization happens around the world, to show them what normal cannabis looks like. I say that because in so many times in the legalization process, we've made compromises that have hurt us in the long term just to get something. And I get it. It's a long march towards freedom, and it's step by step. And sometimes you got to make those compromises to get things done. Like we in California, it has to close at 10 p.m. We have to pay stupid taxes and all these other regulations, right? That's what we needed to get it across the finish line. But that really doesn't support a thriving industry.
No, and we've proven that we can behave like adults, so we should be able to have nice things.
Yeah. So like when, in these legalization battles in Europe, they're like, you can't advertise, you can't, have your name on the front door. Like Barcelona, like if you want to find a socio in Barcelona,
so hard.
it's like is like find a dark alleyway and then look for the, three, and then knock 3 times, and it's just not normal. It's not normal. And if it's not normal, people won't perceive it as normal.
Yeah.
And, you come to West Hollywood and you see places like the Sunset Social Club where you're just walking by and, there's a place where you can go smoke weed.
Yeah.
And you've got the woods where it's like this outdoor venue.
It's gorgeous.
And, the woods proves you don't need odor mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
Then pay millions of dollars to have a smoking lounge because their neighbors don't complain about the smell. They complain about the noise, right? And the noise is coming from the birds, and the macaws that they have.
They're
back
gorgeous.
in the back, and so, the more we present ourselves as normal and show that cannabis is normal and that cannabis is everywhere, the more we'll be perceived as normal,
Right.
And, I go back to, God doesn't make mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Genesis 1:29, it talks about God gave us, these flowers and plants with seeds and the fruits that have the seeds in them. And they're for us. And he created them for us.
That's right.
And that means he created a cannabis for us.
And cannabis is about community, and community only works when everybody's at the table. So for those who want to reach out and learn more about the documentary, get involved, how do they do that? And also to contact you too and to follow what you're doing on social media. How do they do that?
The best way to reach out for Queer and Cannabis is follow us on Instagram. It's at queer.in.cannabis. And then we also have a website where we sell really cute merch. We have all of our events that we're doing, and that's at queerandcannabis.com.
Awesome.
And for Emerald Village West Hollywood, it's at Emerald Village WeHo on Instagram, emeraldvillageweho.com. And of course, if you're in Southern California, we're right in the heart of LA, in between Hollywood and Beverly Hills.
And really, for those of you out there who want an amazing experience, please come to WeHo, check out all these beautiful spots, get involved. And yes, come see us. It's great. Thank you guys for joining me, and I'm so excited to continue the weekend. And I'm also excited to continue the conversation with you guys because this is something that we need to talk about more and get this out.
And thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sarah Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sarah on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsarah.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.